Welcome back. In this video, we are going to build this little application, which is the H2 minutes calculator. So it's going to calculate how old we are in terms of minutes. So you can see I'm 17.5 million minutes old roughly. And I can then just select a date here. Let's say you were born in 2018, which is very unlikely, on September 14th. So if you're 3 years old, that means that you have lived for 1.579 million minutes. Okay, so that's basically what this tool can do for you. You can just then select the date of your friends and see how old they are and just tell them, hey, you're 15 million minutes old, or congratulations to your 20th millionth minute or so. So you could celebrate all kinds of weird stuff there. Okay, you can of course adjust the tool so that it will tell you how old you are in hours, but that would be a very easy change that you can do later on. For now, we're going to focus on how to build this user interface, and we're going to look at listeners a little more. For example, this button, once we click on it, you can see that this date picker appears. You're going to see how to implement such a date picker to your application and then get the data from that date picker that the user has selected and then do some calculations in order to then finally display the result. So we are going to again see how you can connect your user interface to do some logic and then display it accordingly. Great, let's get started. So we're going to get started with an empty activity here. So let's select that because we want to start from scratch. And I'm going to call this one DOB calc. This will be the date of birth calculator. And you can change the save location if you want to. Package name, as I told you earlier, should be unique. Then we set the language to Kotlin, and the minimum SDK can stay at API 21, which is pre-selected for us. Okay, so let's go ahead and click finish, and this will then start the Gradle process. This can take a while, up to a couple of minutes, depending on your PC. Okay, once it's ready, you can go ahead and can start making changes to your user interface. And that would be to change the activity main XML as we know. Okay, so let's go over to it. You can of course also just go to your layouts folder. So here resources, layout, and then to activity main. And then you will see this file, which is pretty hard to see with all of the stuff that's happening here right now. So here, let me zoom out a little bit, and you can see that this is basically going to be the user interface that I currently have, which is just the hello world statement here. So there's really not much happening, pretty boring. And we're going to change that because we want to display some more data. As you saw, this is the user interface that we want to have as a result. So let's get started by changing this hello world text here. You can see that there are a bunch of connections towards all directions. That's because we are inside of a constrained layout, and it just needs to know how this view is constrained, and it's constrained towards all its parents' borders. So the parent is its constrained layout. We're going to change that to a relative layout, which will make it a little easier for us. But let's first of all start by changing the properties of this text view hello world. Okay, I'm going to give it a different name, and you can see here on the right hand side there are attributes that we can change. So I can just click into this text view, also in the component tree on the left hand side, or directly in the designer here, and then I can change the name. So I'm just going to call this one calculate your. Okay, so this will be the first line, so to speak. So it should be calculate your. Then we will have H with a little background. This will show you some tricks along the way. Okay, so that's the text, and you can see it's there, but it's significantly smaller than the result that we want to have, and it has a different color. So let's change those two things as well. In order to change the color, you can just search for color here, and then the one that we want to change is going to be the text color. So you can either select the text color from the pre-existing ones that we have available here, or you can just click on this little black icon here and then select the color from the date picker, or just use a hexadecimal value for it. So what would be a hexadecimal value? Well, a hexadecimal value is a value that includes something between 0 and F. So what the heck is F? Well, let's look at it here real quick. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is the decimal system, and we start at 0 actually. Okay, this is the decimal system, but the hexadecimal system then just goes on. So it goes all the way to F. Okay, so it has 16 values. So these are 16 values, and that's what hexadecimal stands for. And in order to define a color, you are using hexadecimal values. So something like 0, 0, 0, 0, like this, would be a value of white. So the red, green, and blue portion of it would each be 0, which means there is no color, and if there is no color, then it's going to be white. If there is a bunch of color, it would be F, 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 F. So 6 Fs, or depending if you also consider an alpha value, it would be 8 Fs. So the first values would be the alpha value, and then you have the red, green, and blue value. In order to demonstrate this a little bit, let's go over to coolors.co, the super fast color schemes generator. So here the beauty is it can help you to generate a palette. Okay, so you can start the generator here, and then you can just go ahead and select the color that you like. So you see here FFFD82, it's going to generate this yellow color. FF9B71 will create this light salmon color, and so forth. So let's say you want to override the color here. So I'm going to just use some different values here. You can see suddenly generates this red color for me, or if I go with a bunch of blue in it, so red, green, and blue, as I said. So this last part is blue. So that means that if I have a bunch of blue, it will create a bunch of red with a bunch of blue, and that is purple, because we have just a very little bit of green. So if I added a lot of green to it, you can see that this is the color that I'm getting. So a bunch of red with all green and all blue. Okay, so that's how this color comes about. So let's say we wanted to use this color. We could just copy it from here and that would be it. But I'm rather going to use this light salmon color. So let me copy that because it's going to be a little more visible on our white background. So let's go back to our project and go to our text selector, text picker, and then just enter this value. And you can see it just uses this value that I entered in there and transfers it in RGB values that we can read. So this FF here stands for 255, this 9B stands for 155, and this 71 stands for 113, because this is not actually 71, but it's 71 in hexadecimal values. Super confusing, but that's how it works. You can, however, also use beautiful colors from the palette that you have available here. So material 600 colors, material 700 colors, they are very similar, but they are slightly different, and you can then just select colors from here directly. And they will suit very well together. So if you are to use this here as your text color, let's say this red color, then you could, for example, use a white background and it would look fine. But of course, black is always good with a white background. Now coming back to colors.co, you can find trending palettes. So colors that fit very well together, because it's really something that I'm not a pro at. And if you know colors very well, you can come up with this stuff yourself. But that's the beauty here. You don't have to come up with this stuff yourself. You can just use color palettes that work together very well. So for example, these 5 colors, they work very well together. If you were to build an application, you could use those colors for the different items or different parts of your application. So you can just copy this color, for example, and then use it as your text color here. Let's do it. And this will then be this blue color that we have. Now I'm not happy with the size of my text. Let's change the size by just searching for size. Okay, here at the top, and we can see we have the scroll bar size and a bunch of other properties. But then the one that I'm most interested in is going to be the text size. So let's change that from 14 SP to, let's say, 25 SP. And SP stands for scalable pixel. Okay, so we're going to have 25 scalable pixels, which will make our text significantly larger on our application. So this seems to be fine. All right, so now that our text is here at the top, I would like it to have a fixed distance towards the top. In order to achieve that, I can just search for something called margin. Okay, you can of course just scroll through and look at all of the different items that you have. So the common attributes are the most important ones, I'd say, but then of course there are a bunch of other really relevant ones as well. For example, the layout margin. So if you want to have a certain distance to other items, you can just use this layout margin thingy, so these properties. And for example, I want to have a distance of at least 16 density pixels towards the top. So let me just enter this, and you can see now I have this 16 here with a straight line. So it's just going to have a distance of 16 dp towards the top. And this is also a very commonly used distance. So 8 density pixels or 16 are usually used when it comes to how much distance you want to have between the edge and your first item. So in my case, I'm going to use 16 dp for my first text here. So this looks quite fine, I believe, on our device. Okay, so I have this color now, and the problem is I just used this color here randomly. So I basically used the text color which I defined once, and what if I want to reuse it? So I will have more text in the future. Well, of course, I could go ahead and just copy this here and then create another item and assign the same text color. But that's not good development. So a better development process would be to go to your colors and set up a new color that you want to use here. So I'm just going to create a new color item here under my colors XML resources, and I'm going to give it the name of, let's say, text blue. Okay, because this will be the blue that I want to use for my text. And I'm going to put it in here. So now I can just reuse this color anytime I want to use it. So coming back to my text color here, I can just go ahead and instead search for text blue and select the text blue here. And now it will be defined as text blue instead of this hexadecimal value, at least here, because the color itself is stored at a safe place where we can very easily reuse it anytime we want. Okay, now one very important part, and that is I want to simplify the process for you when it comes to creating the user interface, and it will be a lot easier for me to teach it to you by using a relative layout where UI items, so text, for example, and buttons and so forth, are relative to each other. Okay, because currently we're using this constraint layout, which is really powerful if you are just dragging and dropping stuff from the palette and just building your UI this way. But I want to show you how to do the same thing using XML, and there it's a lot easier to use the relative layout, because if you look at the code of our design that we currently have, we have this text view with a bunch of different properties, and the only ones that we have defined are the margin top, the text, as well as the text color and text size. So there is a bunch of other stuff that we have never defined. So here wrap content, for example, it just says how wide is this item going to be, and wrap content is one of the two options that we have here. So actually with 3 options. We can define specifically how wide the item should be with density pixels. So I could just say this should be 200 density pixels, for example, which wouldn't be a good approach. Or I can just say, okay, just take enough space that you can show yourself. So the view should only be big enough to enclose its content, which just means it will take its own width. So however many letters it needs to show, and then it will show that plus a little bit of padding. The same goes for the height here. I could also say match parent, which will then make this thing as wide as its parent, which means as the constraint layout in which it currently is. So it's in this container called constraint layout. So this text view that we have here. But I'm going to use wrap content, which is good practice for items that shouldn't take the entire space. Now on top of that, I have all of these properties here with constraint bottom to top of and to bottom of and so forth, and this makes it quite complicated in my opinion. So I'm going to get rid of that, at least for now, and we're going to use constraint layouts later. But if I get rid of those properties, you can see the text view suddenly isn't happy. And if I look at my design, it just dragged this item all the way to the top left because there are no constraints anymore. Well, I'm going to change that by, first of all, just changing this not being a constraint layout, but instead I'm going to use a linear layout. Okay. I think I said relative layout earlier. We're going to see how to use relative layouts as well, but we're going to use a linear layout for now. Okay, so we have this a linear layout now and a bunch of additional items here. I'm going to go over what that is later on. For now, just consider that these are namespaces which just allow us to use certain items. So it's similar to the namespaces that we have seen here, like the imports that we had, where without those imports, we wouldn't be able to use all of those different items like the onCreate method, like the bundle and so forth. And the same goes for these namespaces that we have here for tools as well as the Android. So here you see XMLNS namespace Android contains all of those properties that we are using here, like the width, height, and so forth. Okay, so then I want to make sure that this text view is going to be in the center, because currently it's just here at the left-hand side, and you see there's a little distance towards the top, but not much. So in order to achieve that, I can change the general settings of the linear layout. I can just say that every item that is in there should be centered horizontally. So I can just go ahead and use the gravity property here and use the settings center horizontal. So what that will do is it will now center its items horizontally. So we didn't change this item itself, like the text view here, but we changed how every item inside of our parent, which is this linear layout, is going to treat its children. It's going to say, hey, you little child, you have to sit here in the center. And that's how it's going to be. So if you were to use center in general, what it would do is it would set all of its items directly into the center itself. You see here, it's centered on the vertical as well as the horizontal level. So that's how you can play around with those values. And by the way, you can just use Control and the empty space in order to see which options you have available here. So I'm just going to say it should be centered horizontally. Let's quickly run this application and see how it's going to look like. So once you run it, you can see it says calculate your, okay? And by the way, I want my application to always be used in this mode here. So it should always be used in this horizontal mode. And in order to achieve that, I can just define it. I can just say that the orientation should always be like that. So let's add the property here called orientation on the linear layout level. And here I can just define it to be vertical, which makes sure that the items inside of the linear layout are going to be stacked on top of each other and not next to each other. All right, so now let's say we want to change the background color of our text here. So white is a very good one, but I'm going to use a slightly different color, which comes from this page as well. So I'm going to use this yellow color, so E9C46A, or you can use whatever color you want. I'm going to use that color in my project. Therefore, I'm going to go over to my colors and I'm going to call this new color background or BG color. Okay, and let's add this hash value. You need to add the hashtag here and use this hash value. Now I can go ahead and use that color. So here, let's change the background and use the BG color that we have just defined. And you see the IDE really helps us out here. So now let's test it or check our designer out. And you can see that this is how it's going to currently look like. So let's run this on our device real quick and see how the change will look like. You can see calculate your, and then we have this yellowish color as the background. Now I would like to make a little change to the calculate your text as well, so that it's going to be actually bold. Okay, so let's go ahead here and search for a property called text, and here it's called style. And you can see here I can choose between bold, italic, and normal. So I'm going to use bold, and let's see how that's going to look like. You can see now our text is going to be bold, which really makes this text a lot larger and more visible. All right, so that's it for this video. In the next one, we're going to add some more text views to our user interface.